The room felt too big for just one person, especially on a night that was supposed to bind two lives together. I sat quietly, trying not to let the emptiness swallow me whole. The soft glow of candlelight danced across the walls, but instead of warmth, it only made the silence louder, as if every flicker mocked the loneliness sitting beside me. My wedding dress, still pristine and heavy with meaning, clung to my skin like a reminder of promises made only hours ago. The lace sleeves felt tighter now, almost suffocating, as though they too sensed something was wrong. I wrapped my arms around myself, hoping to find comfort. But even my own touch felt cold. My husband had left the room without saying a word, no explanation, no reassuring glance, not even a whisper that he'd return. His footsteps had faded down the hallway the moment we entered this house, leaving me suspended in a strange place between confusion and dread. A wedding night was meant to be full of anticipation, of soft laughter, of whispered dreams for the future. Instead, I sat alone, counting the minutes, wondering what sin I could have committed within the span of a single day to make him walk away. The ticking of the ornate clock on the wall grew louder the longer I stared at it. Each second felt like a needle pricking my patience, reminding me that time was moving, while I was stuck in the same spot waiting for answers that weren't coming. My eyes drifted to the closed door again, hoping maybe I would see its handle turn, but it remained still, as silent and unmoved as the man who had walked through it. My thoughts twisted into a tangled mess. Was he regretting the marriage already? Had I misread every moment we shared before this day? The gentle smiles, the stolen glances, the warmth in his voice when he spoke about our future? Maybe it had all been an illusion, a fragile dream I had built on assumptions and thin threads of affection. The idea made something inside me sink, heavy and unwanted. I stood up suddenly, unable to sit any longer. My legs trembled slightly, not from the weight of the dress, but from the weight of uncertainty pressing against my chest. I walked toward the window, the cool night breeze slipping through the cracks and brushing against my skin like a ghost of comfort. Outside, the world seemed calm. The moon hung low, silver and serene, casting a pale light across the empty courtyard. It didn't match the chaos inside me. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to steady the trembling in my fingers. It didn't help. The fear stayed, clinging to me like a shadow. The loneliness felt personal, intentional, even though I knew nothing for sure. My heart kept beating stubbornly, hoping he would return, explain, apologize, something, anything to break the growing ache settling beneath my ribs. As the minutes stretched into nearly an hour, the candles began to burn lower, their flames smaller, weaker, just like my patience. I felt foolish. A bride on her wedding night should never feel abandoned, should never have to wonder why her husband couldn't stand to be near her. The thought dug into me slowly, painfully. I pressed my palm against my chest, as if I could hold myself together long enough to stop my emotions from spilling out. The silence in the room deepened, becoming almost suffocating. The walls seemed to lean closer, as if they were listening to the frantic beat of my heart. I walked back to the bed and sank into it, the mattress sinking beneath the weight of my anxiety. I stared up at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks in the plaster, wondering how many broken things this old house had seen, and whether my marriage had just become another one. My throat tightened. I didn't want to cry, not on this night. Not in this dress. Not because of a man I barely understood. But the tears came anyway, slipping silently down my cheeks. I bit my lip to keep the sobs from escaping, but the ache in my chest only grew stronger. Then, just as the clock reached midnight, everything changed. The silence broke. A sound, soft, gentle, almost hesitant, echoed faintly from the hallway outside. It snapped through the room like a shiver along my spine. I stopped breathing. My tears froze mid-motion. Every muscle in my body tightened as I lifted my head. Someone or something was out there. And suddenly, being alone was no longer the scariest part of the night. The sound was so soft at first that I questioned whether it was real or just a trick of my restless mind. It came again, light, dragging, almost like fabric brushing against old wooden boards. I sat completely still, my breath caught halfway in my throat. The air shifted around me, growing colder, pressing against my skin as if urging me to listen more carefully. My heart, already fragile from the night's uncertainties, began beating faster, loud enough that I wondered if whatever was outside could hear it too. I wiped my cheeks quickly, trying to erase the evidence of my tears, though the ache they'd left behind clung stubbornly to my chest. Every thought I'd had earlier, fear, confusion, anger mixed into a heavy storm inside me. The wedding dress rustled softly as I stood up, the lace trailing behind me like unspoken questions. I forced myself to move quietly, slowly, even though all I wanted to do was crawl back onto the bed and hide beneath the covers. The hallway outside was barely visible through the gap under the door. Only thin slivers of moonlight stretched across the floor, slicing through the darkness like silver blades. As the house settled, the old wooden beams groaned, but those familiar creaks were nothing like the sound I'd heard just moments ago. Again there it was, this time clearer, closer, a gentle but deliberate shift, like someone adjusting their weight, as though they were standing right outside my door. My pulse jumped painfully. My first thought should have been, it's him, he came back. But the strange part was, I didn't feel relief. I felt something colder, something that clenched its fingers around my spine. Why would he return so silently? Why hide his presence instead of speaking, knocking, or at least making the kind of normal noise a person makes when moving around? I reached for the door, my hand trembling. My fingers hovered over the handle, shaking so visibly I almost pulled back. But curiosity, stubborn and desperate, pushed me forward. I needed to know. I couldn't sit alone in that room any longer, drowning in my own thoughts and fears. I opened the door slowly. The hinges creaked softly, the sound stretching into the dark hallway like a warning. The corridor beyond lay still, yet the silence felt wrong, somehow thicker, heavier, as if it had swallowed something whole. Moonlight spilled in from the window at the far end, illuminating dust particles suspended in the air. They drifted lazily like tiny ghosts, floating in a space that suddenly felt more haunted than real. The house itself seemed to be holding its breath. My bare feet touched the cold wooden floor, the chill rushing up my legs. The boards beneath me let out quiet creaks, each step a reminder of how alone I felt, how small. I glanced behind me once, half expecting the room to call me back with the false comfort of familiarity, but the silence there felt suffocating. Forward was the only direction left to go. As I took a few steps into the hallway, I paused, listening intently. A faint hum filled the air, not mechanical, not human, but something in between. I strained to hear it more clearly, but it faded as quickly as it came, leaving only the pounding of my heart in its place. Then another sound, more distinct this time. A murmuring maybe? Or breathing? I blinked hard, my senses sharpening with fear. That noise wasn't a house settling. It was too intentional, too alive. My throat tightened, and my breaths turned shallow. I took another few steps forward until I reached a spot where the hallway curved slightly to the right, a place hidden from my direct view. It was where the shadows gathered darkest, where the moonlight couldn't reach. From that corner came a soft creak, followed by what sounded unmistakably like someone shifting their stance. My knees weakened. Could it be him? I wanted to say his name, but the words stuck in my throat. Fear kept my voice locked away, as though speaking might summon something I wasn't ready to face. I pressed my palms together to steady them, but they wouldn't stop shaking. I leaned forward, listening so carefully that even the faintest breath felt like it could break me. Something moved behind the corner slowly, deliberately, a dark shape stretching across the wall in a long, distorted shadow. My mouth went dry. The angle of the moonlight made the shadow waver, bending unnaturally as if it didn't quite match a human form. My mind raced. Was I imagining this? Was the exhaustion of the night twisting reality into something else? No, my instincts screamed the opposite. Something real was there. Someone was there. I swallowed hard and forced myself to take one more step. Just one. The floorboard beneath me creaked, loud enough to betray my presence. The shadow jerked slightly as though the figure had turned toward me. My breath stopped. The world stood still, and in that moment, I knew with chilling certainty, whatever waited around that corner was about to change everything. My pulse roared in my ears as I stood frozen in place, staring at the shifting shadow trembling along the wall. It stretched and pulled like it had a life of its own, and for a terrifying second, I wondered if I had stepped into a nightmare woven from fear and exhaustion. The moonlight flickered as a cloud drifted past, dimming the hallway and making the shadow warp even further. My breath hitched painfully. I could feel the tremble in my legs traveling all the way to my fingertips. Then another movement. Slow, controlled, human. A faint sigh reached me, quiet but unmistakably real. The sound washed over my skin like a cold ripple. That single exhale told me what fear had kept me from admitting. This wasn't a ghost or a trick of light. Someone was standing there. I swallowed, feeling my throat scrape dry. I forced my foot forward, as though I were pushing through a thick, invisible barrier. My wedding dress brushed against the floor, its hem whispering against the old wood, reminding me how out of place. I was a bride wandering through her own home like a stranger. As I neared the bend in the hallway, the air grew heavier. The silence pressed against my ears until my own heartbeat felt deafening. I reached the edge of the corner and paused. For a moment, neither of us moved, the person hidden beyond the wall and me. It felt like a silent standoff, a breathless tug of war where the darkness waited to see who would give in first. I leaned forward slowly, just enough to peer around the corner. And there he was, my husband, still in his wedding suit, the jacket rumpled as though he had been pulling at it. His back was slightly hunched, shoulders tense. He wasn't standing, he was kneeling on the floor. His head bowed so low his forehead nearly touched a small, wooden box placed in front of him. The sight struck me so sharply that my fear cracked down the middle, replaced by confusion and a sudden, overwhelming ache. His hands were trembling as they hovered over the box. It looked older than anything else in this house, its wood darkened with age, the edges worn smooth by time. The lid was half open, revealing a stack of letters inside. Their paper was yellowed, fragile, the handwriting on them faded by years. A strange mixture of emotions flooded me. Relief that he was here, fear that something was terribly wrong, anger for being left alone, and something else, something fragile. He didn't seem to hear me as I inched closer, my steps quiet but not silent. When I reached him, I saw his face pale, drawn, eyes red as though he had been fighting back. Tears or had already lost that battle. My breath caught. This was not the man I had married earlier in the day. This was someone shattered. Someone carrying a weight I had never seen before. His fingers brushed the edge of a letter. It shook in his hands. He exhaled shakily, a broken sound that felt too intimate for me to witness and yet too painful to walk away from. "Why are you here?" The words slipped out before I could stop them, soft, not accusing, but trembling with raw confusion. He lifted his head slightly, startled by my voice. When his eyes met mine, something inside him collapsed. He didn't even try to hide it. "I didn't want you to see this," he whispered. His voice sounded like it had been scraped against stone, rough, fragile. He looked away, ashamed or afraid. I couldn't tell which. The letters in the box rustled, shifting slightly as if stirred by the weight of his grief. I stepped closer, lowering myself to the floor beside him. The cold wood seeped through my dress, but I barely felt it. All I could see were the letters, so many of them, each one looking like it carried a story heavy enough to crush him. "Who are they from?" I asked gently. His jaw tightened. He blinked hard, as though holding back another wave of emotion. "My mother," he finally whispered. "Her letters, all of them. She wrote these before she died." He pressed his palm against the box as though grounding himself. His voice trembled with each word. "Tonight is the anniversary. I come here every year to read them." A silent shiver ran down my spine, not from fear, but from the revelation that I had married a man carrying a wound that ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. And suddenly, everything, the silence, the distance, the abandonment, made a painful, heartbreaking kind of sense. He hadn't left me. He had been drowning. His confession hung in the air like a fragile thread, trembling between us. I felt it settle into the room, quiet, heavy, and devastating. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just watched him. This man I thought I knew, now looking like a child left out in the cold. His shoulders curved inward as though he were trying to make himself smaller, trying to make his grief take up less space. But grief never does that. It spills, it overflows. And tonight, I could see it drowning him completely. I didn't know what to do with my hands. They hovered in the air before slowly lowering to my lap. Part of me wanted to touch him, to pull him into my arms, to promise him he didn't have to face this night alone ever again. Another part, still hurting from hours of abandonment, felt hesitant, unsure if I had the right to cross that distance yet. I had spent the night feeling unwanted. Now I was staring at a man who desperately needed someone. He reached into the box with shaking fingers and pulled out one of the letters. The paper looked so fragile I feared it might crumble in his grasp. He held it gently, like something sacred. His eyes softened as he stared at the tears, or had already lost that battle. My breath caught. This was not the man I had married earlier in the day. This was someone shattered. Someone carrying a weight I had never seen before. His fingers brushed the edge of a letter. It shook in his hands. He exhaled shakily, a broken sound that felt too intimate for me to witness and yet too painful to walk away from. "Why are you here?" The words slipped out before I could stop them, soft, not accusing, but trembling with raw confusion. He lifted his head slightly, startled by my voice. When his eyes met mine, something inside him collapsed. He didn't even try to hide it. "I didn't want you to see this," he whispered. His voice sounded like it had been scraped against stone, rough, fragile. He looked away, ashamed or afraid. I couldn't tell which. The letters in the box rustled, shifting slightly as if stirred by the weight of his grief. I stepped closer, lowering myself to the floor beside him. The cold wood seeped through my dress, but I barely felt it. All I could see were the letters, so many of them, each one looking like it carried a story heavy enough to crush him. "Who are they from?" I asked gently. His jaw tightened. He blinked hard, as though holding back another wave of emotion. "My mother," he finally whispered. "Her letters, all of them. She wrote these before she died." He pressed his palm against the box as though grounding himself. His voice trembled with each word. "Tonight is the anniversary. I come here every year to read them." A silent shiver ran down my spine, not from fear, but from the revelation that I had married a man carrying a wound that ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. And suddenly, everything, the silence, the distance, the abandonment, made a painful, heartbreaking kind of sense. He hadn't left me. He had been drowning. His confession hung in the air like a fragile thread, trembling between us. I felt it settle into the room, quiet, heavy, and devastating. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just watched him. This man I thought I knew, now looking like a child left out in the cold. His shoulders curved inward as though he were trying to make himself smaller, trying to make his grief take up less space. But grief never does that. It spills, it overflows. And tonight, I could see it drowning him completely. I didn't know what to do with my hands. They hovered in the air before slowly lowering to my lap. Part of me wanted to touch him, to pull him into my arms, to promise him he didn't have to face this night alone ever again. Another part, still hurting from hours of abandonment, felt hesitant, unsure if I had the right to cross that distance yet. I had spent the night feeling unwanted. Now I was staring at a man who desperately needed someone. He reached into the box with shaking fingers and pulled out one of the letters. The paper looked so fragile I feared it might crumble in his grasp. He held it gently, like something sacred. His eyes softened as he stared at the steadied against my shoulder, warm and uneven, as though he had been holding it for years and only now felt safe enough to let it go. My arms tightened around him, not out of obligation, not out of sympathy, but out of a growing tenderness I hadn't expected to feel so strongly tonight. This wasn't the wedding night I imagined, but it was real, and sometimes reality is more intimate than any fantasy. Eventually, he pulled back, wiping the corner of his eye with the back of his hand. Embarrassed by his tears, I caught his wrist gently before he could look away from me. "You don't have to hide from me," I murmured. "Not this. Not anything." He stared at me for a long moment, as though trying to decide whether he deserved that kind of acceptance. His fingers brushed mine, hesitant, searching before curling around my hand. The warmth of his touch surprised me. It wasn't perfect or confident. It was fragile, human, and in that vulnerability, I saw the man behind all his quiet walls, the one he rarely allowed anyone to witness. Without a word, he reached for another letter. This one, unlike the others, was sealed and untouched. His hand wavered as he held it, a small frown forming on his face. "I've never opened this one," he admitted softly. "It was the last one she wrote. But I was scared to read it, scared of what it might say, or what it might break. I didn't push him. I didn't urge him. I simply waited." And after a long exhale, he carefully broke the seal. The paper inside was more delicate than the rest, the ink slightly darker, as though she had written it with trembling hands, pressing harder to make every word count. As he read silently, his expression shifted slowly, fear melting into longing, then into grief, then into something softer, something that looked very much like peace. He handed the letter to me next. His hands were still trembling, but not from fear this time, more from release. I read it slowly, every word sinking deeper into me. "If you ever read this on a night when you should be celebrating happiness, know that my love is with you, holding you steady. Don't be afraid of loving someone. Don't be afraid of letting them see you. The world takes enough from us. Don't let it steal your chance at joy. Let someone in. Let them stay." My breath caught. When I lifted my eyes, he was already watching me, his emotions laid bare in a way that made my chest tighten. "She wrote this for tonight," I whispered. He nodded slowly, voice cracking. "I think she wanted me to stop running." A fragile smile pulled at his lips, small, hesitant, but real. I reached up and cupped his cheek gently. "Then let this be the night you stop." He leaned into my touch, closing his eyes as though the simple gesture soothed the wound too deep for words. When he opened them again, they were clearer, lighter. He reached for my other hand, holding both of mine now, as if anchoring himself to something solid for the first time. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, so deeply sincere it felt like the apology reached inside me and untangled every knot of hurt I had carried since the moment he'd left the room. "I understand now," I replied, and I meant it. The distance between us shrank, not physically, but emotionally, in a way far more profound. The air shifted around us, the night seeming to soften with the weight of truths finally spoken. He carefully placed the letters back into the box, closing the lid with a reverence that felt like closure rather than grief. Then he turned to me and held out his hand, not as a husband asking for forgiveness, but as a man asking to begin again, honestly, vulnerably. I took it. Together we rose from the cold floor, fingers entwined. He guided me back down the hallway. And this time my heart was not pounding from fear but from something warmer, something hopeful. The house that had felt eerie and suffocating earlier now felt different, like the walls themselves had exhaled with relief. When we reached our room, he paused, looking at me with a softness I had not seen before. "Thank you," he whispered, "for staying." I stepped closer, resting my forehead against his. "I'm not going anywhere." And in that quiet moment, with the moonlight brushing gently across our faces and his mother's last words echoing softly in the back of my mind, I realized something. Our marriage didn't begin at the altar earlier that day. It began here, in the raw truth of midnight, in the fragile space between sorrow and understanding, in the moment he finally let me in.